Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in April 2023. And here we're going to be talking about how to conduct effective tabletop exercises for cybersecurity response and practice, which is a topic, and I think everybody here has very strong views and a lot of experience. So I'm Dinis Cruz. I'm the CISO of Holman Barrett, also the chief scientist of a UK company called Glasswall. Why don't we go, Guy? Am I wrong? Maybe a quick intro about you.
Well, I am now managing a cybersecurity consulting company based out of Luxembourg. But before, I was the CISO for Sony Electronics in Europe and the CISO for Sony globally, based out of Singapore. And we were, as some of you may know, the target of some interesting adversaries, as we would call them. So I can tell you a little bit why these tabletop exercises are important and what really matters versus the real thing at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Venkat?
Yeah, I'm Venkat, founder of Flexible AR. Primarily, I work for companies like Sun Microsystems and Yahoo as a product development engineer. But for the last 5 years, it's my primary work has been around playbooks and conducting drills, tabletops. That's what I do. Yes.
Cool. Nathan?
I'm a data security. I'm a security advocate at Datadog. Let me get that straight. I spent most of my career doing incident response and helping people like Sony after the fact. I have similar opinions, most likely to Guy, on exactly why you do tabletops as opposed to do the incident cold without having ever practiced it. So I'm very interested in what's going to happen.
Cool. So maybe let me just put this concept there, right? So first of all, absolutely, right? The more you can tabletop, the better it is, right? I'm not going to deny the value. I do have an issue on a lot of the ones I've been involved with, where sometimes people are too relaxed. And they almost are 1 or 2 steps away from a real thing, which makes it even not more realistic, right? What I like to do is I actually like to do almost a tabletop exercise on top of an existing incident. So this has the advantage that you can do it anywhere, because you can take any incident from the most simple incident that you can get, and you can escalate it. And I kind of there's a interesting analogy that we now use, which is like a meteorite. So imagine a meteorite hits the earth, right? A lot of the ways you can go, oh, cool, it didn't hit a house. Great, nothing to do here. Or you can say, oh, look, it hit that house, call the fire brigade, bang, 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 deal with it, everything is good, bang, right? The interesting question is, why didn't we see it, right? What can we do about it? Are there more coming, right? Are we good at even just dealing with a side effect? You don't want a meteorite to start a fire on the whole city, right? Or a whole thing, right? So what I like is to take any incident and with a little bit of creativity and actually not just that, I would say mandate, you take a P3 and you run it as a P1. And the beauty of that is that it's for real. Like whatever the P3 was, it just happened. So it's much easier to say, hey, look, the attackers turn right instead of turning left, right? Hey, look, that key was exposed and you got lucky that it was there, right? But if that key had this, or he had this, but it wasn't used, but it could have been used, right? So it's easy to take any incident and just elevate it and then look at, everything that should be in place. That then it's almost like you go, I'm glad we had a week to deal with this versus 2 hours, because especially the first time to do it, even basic stuff are not in place. So I would argue that the best tabletop is actually a P1, an elevated P3.
So can I push back a little bit before we get into what you said? I'm going to debate that there are actually 2 types of tabletops. You have the real tabletop, which is exactly what you just discussed. And then you have the more fanciful tabletop, which is a general discussion around a different thing. So we have a tabletop, which is, hey, I'm helping you do your company, and we're talking about a thing that occurred to you. And then we're doing something instead outside of that is a different company, and we're going to pretend like we work over here. And both of those things are helpful, but both of those things are helpful in different ways. And I think to do the second, to do the one that you're talking about, you have to earn a significant amount of trust internal to the team so that operations and development and security and whoever else was involved feel like they can communicate and play deeply and intensely and not have bad things happen, not get blamed. I think it's a little easier to play that second type and earn that trust first, but we can continue. I just want to make sure that we pointed out that.
Dinis, just to add to it, one of the things that I've say for the last few years when I've been doing tabletops, I'll just share my screen for a few minutes here. Just wanted to show. So initially, when I was doing tabletops for a few companies, what I was doing was I was starting on a Monday, 10 o'clock, right? Something happens, right? At that time, it was very difficult for me to conduct the exercise, bringing in that air of realism. So then slowly, I moved to something like this. It's like a live scenario to handle. For example, 4 o'clock today, right? I mean, today, 4 o'clock, everything is working fine for a company. And say next 5 minutes from now, like the website is defaced. What was this? Where there was normal traffic, everything looks fine. The next 5 minutes, something happens. And then the calls coming in. Someone is not able to take the orders. Joe keeps telling that customers are not able to order this. There is calls coming in from call center. So here's the situation, right? And you start working on it. So we figured out that it's good to have something live, exactly like the P1 being P3, rather than telling something happens on a Monday. It's difficult to work that way.
Yeah. Yeah, completely agree.
I would say that you know, when I compare you know, the situation before we had the big attacks and afterwards, yeah. So obviously, when it happens, and you know, let's say we took the very official PlayStation hack in 2011, that was April 2011. You know, obviously, everybody was surprised. You know, our company was attacked by hacktivists. Okay, we never had any idea what is even was the meaning. Do we ever have anything to do with hacktivists? Yeah. Suddenly, they were there. They attacked 26 websites. Okay, not too bad. Of course, the company realized later on that it had 5,000 websites. So 26 out of 5,000 is not the percentage-wise, it's not too bad. It's your attack surface is enormous, so yeah, they're gonna hit something, yeah. But the point is, and later on there was the Sony Pictures event also with North Koreans, yeah, to some extent, and you know. When I compare, the company who got hit had at the end for a couple of years doubled the budget of what it had before, what the others were doing. Yeah? And the other companies which were not in the same group, they were also scared because our friends and neighbors got hit. So we're going to be scared. So they were scared for 2 or 3 years, and then they forgot a little bit about it. Yeah. So we always have to have we have to produce in some ways the feeling of urgency, the feeling of the pressure which is there, and I think that's not so easy when nothing ever happened. Yeah, it's a bit theoretical when it happened. Yeah, and so forth. And it's even more complicated than that, because when both the PlayStation incident and the North Korean incident happened in the US, yeah. So the problem is in the US, I'm sorry if I generalize a bit, is that you know there were legal issues behind, or legal consequences that someone may, your employees, your partners may come after you. So the next you know. The next meeting we had globally, the person from that division would come, say, I cannot say anything. Sorry, I cannot say anything. I cannot say anything. Zero. Because we have legal proceedings going on. Organization learns nothing. Yeah. That is a serious, another problem one has to be aware. Yeah. It is, you cannot, you know, and these legal proceedings can last for a little while. Yeah.
Years.
It's years, I should say. So, you know, I could read more on the internet than I could read internally. Yeah, for a little while, and so forth. And there's some consequences. That's just to make you aware that this is the real thing. But so I agree with what Dinis was saying, that we have to, hopefully we don't have a major incident, but we have to blow up in some sense the small things we have, or the medium things we have every day, to get the practice. The other thing is, when something happens to your company, there's alignment of typically between the management and the technical teams somewhere. This alignment sometimes is not there normally. Maybe the security team hasn't, I'm now advising and consulting. And the security team doesn't know the senior management, doesn't know the board, and so forth, doesn't even have a full feeling of risk appetite, and so on. Yeah. When of course it's happening, the incident is happening, then people, this crisis, and we're one team and we work together. But we have to find a way to make these people who are not normally working together unless it's a crisis simulate it, because there are many unspoken rules, which we have to establish between the management. If this and this happened, are we going to say something to the press? If this and this happened, are we going to shut down our website? If this and this happens, what is our reaction? The more we establish those rules, and I think it's not a tabletop exercise directly, but it's a kind of immediate side product, an important side product, because it gives us the rules of engagement, and it puts, in some sense, the borders around our playing field, and it makes our company's attitude, whether it is business attitude or moral attitude towards our customers who may be exposed as a result of all these things, are clear, and that is typically not written down. It's not even discussed. While in some sense these rules of engagement are also so important. So I think having the exercise, making management and the technical team to work together, it's an important thing, and coming to know each other. And the second thing, also developing a number of rules of engagements, which are the core principles under which we're going to have to do the harder decisions in something, not the obvious ones, is also an important part. Yeah, but I think anything which the third thing is, and I can speak a little bit about that later, is to not only do the tabletop exercise as in, there's something happening and what are we going to do, and that's what Venkat is exercising every day these days on some side. I think we have to find also a way to simulate the pressure. Yeah, I think there's a part which is not technical. It is simply, after incident is not just 2 hours. It may not just be 24 hours. It may last a week. Who knows, even longer, and and people get very nervous. The technical team get nervous. Some managers thinking, well, I may be blamed because I didn't invest enough in security before, so they're playing games. They, after cannot sleeping anymore for 2 days, they cannot think straight anymore. And I think this exercising, or how to keep a certain performance under stress, is not a technical problem, and it needs a non-technical exercise. It needs, I would say, almost. I'm working now. That's why I'm a little bit better about some training exercises to train that part, because that is after a day or two, you are no longer in the comfort zone at all, even though you may still have a clear situation. Yeah, and I think the other one is, maybe to add a little bit, is money things. Yeah, if you have to use Mandiant to help you on the forensics, before I had my previous CISO was coming from Homeland Security. He always was saying, well, if you use these guys, before you turn your head to the left, they have spent $500,000. Yeah.
That might be a little high, but yeah.
But at that time maybe. But the point is, I'm not talking about business impact even. immediate cost. So there's also issues and dealings with the pressure coming from, am I guilty, or how to solve the problem, what really happened. If I cannot tell my boss, I still don't understand what's happening. The business impact from the customer reputation, but even the pure running the exercise in a way, the money runs very quickly. And if your company has been attacked by ransomware, suddenly your PCs don't work anymore. So you have to rebuild the thing. Then you have to spend even more and get organized. So I think I throw that on the table because I think they are aspects beyond the very clear linear, not linear, but let's say reasonably linear way to go through the playbooks in some way, which is the most important part. These are, let's say, peripheral things, which I think the more they are discussed before, the more a modus operandi can be developed, which will help then establish some engagement rules or playing rules, I think, which are important.
I think you touched on it perfectly. I mean, as you look at playbooks, right? And having the playbook is important, but as you build out that first initial tabletop and you start looking at how am I going to interact with HR or legal or management or the executives beyond management and the board after that, building out those playbooks, understanding how all of those people are going to react. I think that's one of the nicest things you can get out of the initial tabletop. And I would suggest, frankly, in my own opinion, that initial tabletop is probably make-believe to the point where it's just silly, because people tend to be a lot less defensive when you say, hey, look, I don't know, take your pick of random crazy thing happens. Well, okay, this is kind of funny. We all find it amusing, no big deal. Nobody's on the point for it, if you will, right? We build a little bit of trust. We begin to be able to communicate in that open way between legal and development and executives. And as you build that trust, you get to the point where you can actually have an open conversation in the event of an actual thing happening and say, look, this is a really scary thing. We're all really tense. And let me tell you, I have never been part of an incident as an outside individual coming in to help them fix it, right? I've never been part of an incident where everybody's totally cool. Like the emotions are insane that day. And it's just what it is. And understanding that, having that discussion, at least before that thing happens, that look, we're all going to be keyed up. It is life. You will be scared your job is on the line. It's not. Things like that, those simple things that people are going to totally focus on, like, am I going to get fired tomorrow because this thing happened? Having that conversation before the event is pivotal towards an event success.
But following on that thought, my feeling, it is generally better if the facilitator for an event is not part of the company.
Yes.
Because someone has to ask the a little bit more complicated questions, or a little
I'm going to poke you with pointy sticks, and we're going to get the answer.
Because otherwise, someone may not be daring to say, okay, I don't want to push my board, I don't want to push the CEO or the CFO. Right. But you have to do it in some ways, and you have to give examples of companies what they have done. So it has to become a normal thing, even though in interpersonal ways it's a little bit complicated.
And it goes back to that pointy stick, right? Like if you're the consultant, I can ask in an open, totally naive way, is this a thing? Right. If I'm the internal person, it's pointy stick time, right? Like I've got to poke you and get the right answer. And all of a sudden there's an emotional connection to that. And as that outside individual, I can walk into the board and say, look, these are the things that are happening. Really cold, really cool. And be able to hand it back to you and say, look, these are the solutions that you have in front of you. What do you want to do?
Absolutely.
But what I think is interesting is that you guys saying that what you want is you want to have a situation where you can simulate, right, high pressure environments. You can simulate the logistical things that you need to operate, how you get the teams together, and even how to generate that stress, right? That sort of it's a bit like the penalty, right? How do you simulate a penalty taker, right? Where there's a big difference in an empty stadium versus a full stadium, right? What I think, and also the no blame culture, right, which I think is important, right?
Yes.
I can generate all of those with a P3 elevated to P1, because the reality is that especially before you have a lot of maturity, the things that starts to fail are obvious to everybody, right? It's kind of like, and what I mean is obvious because as long as you're asking the right questions, like for example, comms, right? I've used, I always look at this as it takes us probably 3 incidents to get where we need to be, right? The good news is that you don't want none of those incidents to be ones where timing really matters, right? So take, for example, that you kind of new on this thing and you have a first instance you need to generate a comms. At that moment in time, I guarantee you that nobody in the people involved knows who to reach out, who's in comms, who makes decisions, where are they, etc. Right? So almost like that's what you solve in the first incident, right? And then you generate and for example, like this could be something as simple as, hey, we've got a new. Let me give you an example. I've done, say there's a new patch pushed by Apple, right? That or by Windows, right? Or that we need to do it. So the question we go is like, hey, can we do this in a day or two? When the answer is no, I elevate that to a P1, right? And if you think about just that small incident, which technically you haven't been exploited, but there's a heightened risk because it's not theoretical, right? This is literally, there's a 0 day. You can even say, hey, there's companies out there who are already being hit. We haven't, but we could go next. So nobody's going to say, let's ignore this. So suddenly you start to ask really hard questions. What's our patching process? What's our update process? Do we have an updated inventory? Do we know how to issue comms? No. Okay, let's talk to the people. But the good news is you then have 3 days to figure out how to update something on the global internet, how to send a messaging to everybody, where, in a bigger instance, you have 2 hours, right? So that's a good example of lots of those things that, again, by the time you get to the 3rd incident, we can do that very quickly because we already know the people, we have the relationships, we know how to bring them, we know
the playbooks by that point, ideally, right? So then you've actually written that stuff down, ideally, if you went through the incident
correctly. So and that's the thing, right? So I always feel sorry for the first dudes who are impacted by this because it feels like fucking CSI investigation. It's like every time I arrive in an organization, like the first one who loses the laptop, I do feel a little bit sorry because it's like, right? Because suddenly you ask them all these 25 questions. What is it? Where it goes? Is encrypted, not encrypted, blah, 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 blah. So you get all this stuff and then eventually realize, okay, for the next dude that loses the laptop, we need to know 3 things from him. We need to know 2 things from that one thing from that one, and then you can delegate down. Then you say, and then by the time you get to the 4th missing laptop, you go, okay, don't wake anybody else up until you know this, because we now made it almost as BAU, again, with the playbooks. And in a way, you can simulate that stress because you can say that, like, for example, the patching is a good example. Like, hey, this is clear and present danger, right? Now, it's like the storm at that sea, or you can see the meteorite coming. It hasn't hit Earth, but it's on its way, right? Now, and then, like I said, you can roll the dice or we can actually do something about it. But those logistical things, ironically, I kind of find that it's, there's 2 big elements here. One is figuring out how to delegate and how to manage and how to, make multiple teams work together. That's one. But I think the most interesting is to get stuff done, right? So I sat down with my team after one of these major ones, and we listed everything we did during an incident. And again, actually, Guy, going to your point, I tend to push the incidents until the point of diminishing returns. So actually, we lasted 2 weeks. I thought we kept going. So I kept saying, clear your schedule. I sign off, right? If there's conflict. So I got to the point where we listed everything we've done, right, in those 2 weeks, right? And then I asked the question to the team. It says, okay, what didn't we do? Because that's the asked question, right? Like, what did you drop to do that, right? Because if you had your day job, which is to do X, and now you've done this, clearly you haven't done something, right? So then we had what we did and the list of what we didn't do, which was already like, you could clearly see we were crazy productive. But the interesting question was when we asked, okay, how long would it have taken us to do that without the incident, right? And the answer around the room was 3 to 6 months, easily. To do that, right? What we did in 2 weeks. Even more interestingly, even in 6 months, we probably would have not done it because we would have burned, or we'd have required so much political capital to drive some of those changes that suddenly, in the middle of that incident, things just happened, right? Because
though, right? You're dealing with the pain at that point. I mean, your pain tolerance has changed from 0 to, you know what, we better get this solved in the next 2 weeks.
I think
and the key is the clear and present danger. The key is not to sugarcoat it. Because so what I've realized, and I think most organizations should behave like this. I still kills me that even other parts of the organization don't leverage this. Because what happens is most people, most teams, when they get an incident, they want to get rid of it. It's almost like the incident is an outlier. They don't want to think about it. They feel like the incident is something that detracts you from your day job, right? So clearly everybody's very focused until you find the root cause. But the root cause tends to be the root cause of the behavior that caused what you think, not the real root cause, right? Like, for example, like if somebody reports a vulnerability via a bug bounty system, I'm a lot more worried why we didn't pick up the bug bounty in the first place, right? It's like, why did we had to have the bug bounty person or a customer? Why do you have a customer report to you that their account was compromised? Think about how many things you missed along the way, right? To do that. So for me, those are the things you want to address. That's why it's P1. It's not P1. So we tend to call it P3 from a business point of view, P1 from security, which is, it's from a business impact at the moment. And sometimes it's like at the moment, but it's growing, reasonably fast. At the moment it's a P3, but it's a P1 for security because we missed A, B, C, D.
But I think one way to which may be interesting is, and we have done, is you take a certain base scenario, like Venkat has outlined, and then you do your tabletop exercise for a little while, and then you do a second version, okay? Because sometimes the first version, someone says, well, we'll ask the CEO to make a decision, And then the second version, the CEO is in an airplane, he's sick, he's somewhere, he's not reachable. So who takes decision in this company? We don't know. So you try to make it a little bit more realistic as a case, and also so that the organization is autonomous. It can make decisions. It can process. It can proceed, even not everybody is physically there. And also because many of the things that I had happened in very unfortunate situations. I went once to the Canary Islands, on a Saturday, and I was on the phone for 1 week after that. $4,000 is the cost of my, because of lousy Wi-Fi location data locally, and so on. So I had to be on, or the CEO is not available, or someone else is not available because it just happened at that time. So I think making the scenarios taking this P3, making the P1, but also thinking about if time allows, obviously, more in versioning, like a little bit simple version first, second version, there is some parameters change, third version.
But we see that with the multiple incidents, right?
I'm going to inject something real quick. The one thing we haven't actually said, and to be fair, Venkat, I don't think you've even spoken, dude. I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead. Good.
I was going to inject threat models. One of the things that we've talked about so far is incidents, and this thing happened, so we're going to do it again. But I'd love to hear Venkat's concept on threat models and what happens when we inject we look at someone's threat models and say, look, you guys all have this same threat that you keep pushing out, and now let's do a tabletop on what happens when that fails.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely nothing. See, in fact, what I call these threat models is scenarios, right? See, what are your top scenarios for a company, right? The moment you chalk down, okay, these are my top scenarios that I could be impacted with, and then you start your kind of your tabletop exercise around them, and again you have your own set of injects, right? See, typically what I have observed is when we start with the scenario, we start with something very basic, telling them, okay, one of the machines is impacted. Now, as the situation progresses, so that's when things keep changing, keep evolving. There are a lot of injects, there are a lot of hurdles. So we take them through a journey which becomes more and more interesting. It's just that we start with something small, as Dinis was telling, it could just be an alert. Then slowly the incident progresses. There's a progression, the adversary comes in, so all the actors start coming in. So that's a journey which again starts from a scenario. You model your scenarios, pick up one of them, start tabletops on them, simple ones, move to complex ones, Start with as simple as too many login attempts, right? Or something very small, defacement, then slowly migrate to a larger ransomware responses. Again, multiple ransomware response kind of situations.
But the best time to do threat modeling is during an incident, right? Because
Of course, it has to be right there and then, right? Like you've got to start writing it out.
Yeah, because there's a couple of things that happens. First of all, nobody will argue if it's theoretical or not theoretical because it's just happened, right? And then the second one is you do have access to everybody that you need because you have access to a lot more people. And the third one is that it's a great exploratory thing. So for example, like if you think about it, when you do a threat model, what you're doing is you're doing the extra scenarios. In fact, you're going for those more complicated scenarios because what you start asking is the what if, right? So for example, I once took an instance, sit down with the CEO and ask him which countries go down first. Right. But by then, that wasn't a theoretical attack. Question was like, hey, we're having a problem over there, right? If that then at the moment is on this country, which countries do we shut down first, right? And suddenly it was very real, right? And then the thing that we got there, but now we formalize a bit better, is we now have a concept of mapping delegated authority, which is, again, is an interesting thing of when you bring a lot of senior people in some organizations, you can start define the rules of engagement. Like, for example, how many accounts can you block independently? How many things you can do? How many business functions can you proactively do something about it without waiting for somebody at a bigger position of authority to make a call, right? What are those moments of escalation, right, that we have? So we start to create this matrix where we start to say, well, this one's the customer service team can do, this one's the security team can do, that one the DevOps team can do, that you need actually now the business owner. I call the
writing it down is the key, right? Like write it down. If you don't write it down, all of that was lost.
Exactly, right. It's kind of like the shitometer, right? Like how high does it go? Like who do you wake up, right? At this moment in time, like do you wake up, the engineer, the security operating person, the CTO, the CISO, the CEO, the board member, like who do you do that, right? But again, a lot of those things you can simulate, right? Like one of the things I really like is I get the members of my team to email, the exec team, right? And that's like, 3-4 levels above, right? But I like the fact they're starting to gain the experience of how do you brief senior execs, why it's important to reach regular comms, all those little things are really hard to start to get the practice. So you need to practice it. You need to do it a lot.
Especially interaction with law enforcement. You kind of touched on that briefly, but
exactly.
As an executive, what are you going to do when the FBI knocks on the door? How are you going to respond? What's going to happen next?
Yeah, absolutely. But you see, you can do all that from mid-level incidents. In fact, the best source of incidents that you can do is the business, is technology. Like the bigger attacker in business is the business itself. Right? Like who causes the biggest downtime? Who causes the biggest data leaks? Who causes the only difference is you don't have an attacker, right? And I tend to sometimes say that, hey, appreciate that on these incidents, the attacker is not moving, right? Because when you have a live attacker, there's a much more action and reaction, for example, which is a lot more dangerous.
Well, in some ways, the business can itself be the attacker, and that's it. I think attacker is the wrong word. I think aggressor might be the appropriate term.
But the business tends to not want to do that, right? So if you think about it, most teams will go, hey, we just crashed production. Oh, it was because that person didn't do this. And you go, okay, let's reverse that. Actually, but why was that possible in the first place? Why did monitoring fail? Why wasn't there other things in place?
You can imagine, for example, we were exposed to WannaCry. Luckily a test version without encryptor, but still it caused all kinds of trouble because when it tried to jump from one system, some systems, I think from an older version of Windows to another version, it crashed the system, not perfectly propagating and so forth. But this was going on because you have to find which machines were infected. It's still propagating at the same time. It's not even externally, but even internally. And I think this is another. Then there's an issue of if you're in one time zone. We were working in 3 time zones or 3 shifts. Sometimes you have to go to sleep, and the next morning you wake up and you notice that the guy in the night has not done anything. And then
We've all danced around it, but I'm going to call out the way NIST actually talks to deal with incident response, and whether you've come up with your own version of incident response or you want to use NIST's version of incident response. The first thing literally is preparation. And then you look at detection and analysis. And if you haven't done the preparation, you really probably don't have everything you need in detection and analysis. And as you get into containment, eradication, and recovery, which always amused the hell out of me that they stuck all three of those in one block, but whatever. As you begin to take that apart and look at what it takes to do containment alone, like I'm going to stop you now. I'm not going to let my attacker guy be able to transit into these other things and pivot into a different system. How do you actually deal with the word containment? So I don't know how many times I've dealt with a customer that's come to me and said, hey, can you help us with incident response? I look at them and go, okay, what system are you using? Oh, we're using O365. Great. Cool. So that's all hosed, right? Yep, that's popped. That's all gone. Okay, cool. So how do you want to, what is your mindset? What do you plan on doing to recover? Oh, we're going to spin up another O365 instance, but we're not going to clean off any of the laptops. And so you look at that containment concept, and you have to understand that going into these things and building out the runbooks and building out the playbooks that control that, part of this is going to be, you've got to make a pretty hardcore switch and dealing with that pain that I think you talked about, Dennis, as you get into some of those things. Well, we could have done this in 6 months, 2 years, you name it. Because today we understand that if we don't pivot and go over here, it's more of a what business question than anything
what you
else.
bring up here is an interesting one, is that which may or may not be part of tabletop, but it's I think should be added, is when you have an incident, and depending a bit on which one, you suddenly have and it's propagating, things are going on or whatever, you have to investigate what really happened. If you do not have the right manpower, it may go beyond your normal manpower. Even when we had I remember the anonymous attacks, they were attacking all kind of websites. I had to mobilize 50 people internally, which I was borrowing left or right, to help me even organize the pen testing of all the various websites I had to actually now verify. I finally made a deal with someone outside company who I promised the double day rate if they would be available immediately.
Yeah. The same thing before,
because I needed them. When I need it, I cannot say when, but I need it immediately. And I must be willing to pay money to get it, because nobody is waiting for me for the call to come and help me. So you have to make an incentive to.
As a total side note to that, I actually only run 4 lines of activity at any one time. So there are literally, I try to delegate as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and use things like Jira or some level of ticketing so that we can actually track those lines of activity. And that's really easy to tabletop, because now we actually have, Dennis was doing this, Guy was doing this, Venkat was doing this, and you can see, because everything's in the notes. And then as you look at your OODA loop and you begin to come around on that, you can say, okay, so this is my observability portion of it. We're going to analyze these things and say, this is the decision we want to make now. It makes it really replayable too.
So I on those cases, I usually take Jira on steroids, which sometimes drive crazy my team. But I had so many cases where it completely saved the day. So we got to the point there, because we use Jira Core Advanced, where we actually have a different Jira, where we have different issue types. So we actually have issue types for incident, for events, for questions, for hypotheses, for tasks, for activities, for projects, all during the incident, even threat agents. So the Jira ticket is massive. But then when you do this to a good level, your playbook becomes a set of Jira tickets. If you think about it, your playbook is, what are the first 10, 20, 30 Jira tickets that you want to create that are delegated across the multiple teams to do that, right? And that works crazy effectively. But the biggest problem I always have is that the most security teams don't like that kind of stuff, because it's almost too prescriptive. And until they really learn, by experience, the power of having that, right? The power of being able to delegate things very effectively. It takes 3-5 incidents for you or more for you to get there.
One interesting thing is, and I think nice that you brought up Jira, because with always the operational head had to beat up everybody to put in the right ticket. Somewhere we're very diligent, somewhere a bit less, but you have to do it. But I think the other thing is what we learned is when the big incident is happening, we need a messaging system. Yeah, the Jira is in the background. This is where the threats are created. But when you have suddenly 50 people who need to be informed in multiple countries in multiple divisions, it's not anymore Jira. Yeah? So the Jira is in the background, it's operating, and the right people do the right thing. But you need a ticketing, you need a messaging system, whatever it is. Yeah, hopefully something which is not affected, but whatever is affecting you. If you could be that's an important aspect. But also trying to exercise that, and I think, for example, the flexible IR platform has the possibility of simulating messaging is important, yeah, because of course it has other problems. When you go to sleep, at some point you wake up in the morning, there's 2,000 lines later, yeah. And you have to read everything because there's few lines which are very important and others not. Even
but that's why you need dedicated people to do that. What I've learned was actually, and I have to say, look, my current hypothesis is that most security people are really bad at this. And I think because the security people just want to get on with it. So what I found is that the best individuals are actually copywriters, are operators, are almost non-technical people that, so usually on some of the big ones I have, I would actually put reasonably senior people. Their job was literally just to calm the comms, calm the Slack channels, calm everything, and create the comms. So we would have like 5, 6, 7 different Slack channels, each with different focus. Some would be high traffic, some would be low traffic. And then we will be issuing comms, very detailed comms, and even sometimes 2 levels of comms to make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on, right, during the incidents. But he actually takes a certain type of individuals, which ironically are usually not security. But ironically, they become security professionals because they start to ask really good questions. And they go, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that, right? Because for them, although they might not fully get it from a security, a lot of security things we do is common sense, right? So I found that I still work with this work from home mom, right? She was one of the best incident responders we had. Checked in at 10 o'clock in the morning, dropped their kids, but the ability, the clarity, the ability, guy like you mentioned, like to create the comms so that you can manage 30, 50 people, right? It's complex. Which is also why
you touched on it wonderfully too, man. Like as you look at inclusion and you look at diversity, yes, inclusion and diversity, that's fine. Completely agree. We have to, as security geeks and as operationalists, be open to the concept that. So I will tell you right now, the best social engineer that I have ever met was the executive assistant to a friend of mine. This lady joined security mid-40s. And was beyond a doubt the best social engineer I've ever worked with. Why? Because she knew how to get her executive from A to B and hit all of the targets in the between and convince everybody that was the most important thing to do. It was beautiful. But as we look at incident response and we look at communication, so for instance, as a CISO, as a directive, as an executive, one of the first things I do is look to hire that copywriter, that writer, because a lot of the things we do have to deal with, how do I get my strategy out to all of the people in a way that is sane, but also how do I get it to the point where I'm working 80 hours a week as it is. I need somebody else to spend another 40 hours a week to do this thing and make sure everybody's on board with it and we're lined up. And so you come into that incident, and I'm always running 2 forms of communication. We've got the technical crazy, which is just, people shooting information back and forth and making sure we get that. We've got a distilled version for executives on the other side, which generally handles what Guy was talking about when you wake up in the morning and you've got 2,000 messages. But you handle that other thing where this person is just typing out a very concise, okay, the internet is currently down. This is why, and this is what we're doing to fix it. Done.
So I usually get my risk teams. If you control a risk team, sometimes you don't, but if you control a risk team, I tend to hire those individuals there because you want to connect. And I want to go to the point where I think Guy mentioned, which is team assembly is super critical, right? Being able to assemble, and sometimes I have made in the past several times the business case to say the reason why, for example, I'm hiring that company as a pen test and that company has this and that company has there is because I want the bad signal. right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I still have to push hard on my team to go leverage the partners, give them the problem, and like go to them, go to Microsoft and say, hey, this just happened, and don't wait for the big one. Do that on small ones, so you have the relationship, so you know how to reach out to these big vendors that we now all use, so that their teams become an extension of ours, right? And I think that is super critical, that you know how to delegate to a bigger team, because during an incident, you get the resources. The question is, do you know what to do with them, right?
Yep.
Do you have, but if you haven't created relationships, it is hard to do it, especially on a real big one, is because then you risk burning a lot of bridges too, right? So it's almost better to take a bit of time to create those relationships in a way that, again, you don't, burn too many bridges by asking a very hard question that should be obvious, but there isn't, right? And then eventually you find the right person. And actually, going back to one of the points that you guys mentioned, I think it's very important to never blame, always look forward, right? And yes, I could argue why it took me 3 days to find you, but I'm not going to do that. You know that, I know that. There's no need to do that. Let's just, especially with others, I think always compliment, right? I've been in many meetings where my team was very surprised because I could have thrown so many people on the bus, and I didn't, right? I praised them. I says, look, they helped us, they helped us, they helped us. The good news, I know the next time is not going to take that amount of time. It's going to take this amount of time, right?
The other one is, I think for whoever is a CISO, whoever will represents him, is implicitly to what we have been saying is the management of resources, You tell someone to check something, he does it. In the meantime, the situation evolves. You have to put it back, because a more likely option or a more important thing has evolved in some ways. On the other hand, so that's, you have to make sure that your resources, your capacity is managed in a proper way based on the most current priority view. The other thing is, if you have, we had cases where there was press involved and press in multiple countries, and then you suddenly have more executive asking for more status updates. You still don't know what's going on, so you have to protect your team who is doing the work from being not only running left or right or harassed by the executives. And that's a good thing to exercise in the tabletop, to say, well, look, we need the prioritization of the capacity, and we need them to work effectively, because it's not easy, it's not obvious. It cannot be interrupted all the time or deviated for a status update, because the pressure is coming at that very moment in a big way.
Leverage other teams, right? Like you talk about for the comms. I had experience where, because we reach out the right way, we had a huge amount of time and an amazing material created by the comms team. All we had to do is almost get them involved, because we already have a comms team, right? Think about it, bigger companies, there's already a corporate communication team. There's already a lot of these other teams are there. It's just that you don't reach out to them. And of course, they cannot help, right? But in security, we have the power that we can speak to everybody, right?
Well, and don't forget about the reverse of this as well. I think one of my favorite incidents, like the favorite from the point of view of I learned the most I could, happened when a CFO decided that he was going to enact a different. So incidents occurring, CFO needs something, so he jumps in and takes stuff. And it was just one of those like, oh my God, I had never considered that he didn't consider the communication relevant to him. So consequently, we could all just go pound sand, and he was going to get what he wanted, even though the business was, collapsing as we were going. And it was just astounding to me to watch him make that call honestly, entirely in a vacuum. Because he was used to being able to do that. And so when we talk about communication and we talk about that, absolutely, we got to practice that. But as well, communicating internally to people that, why would the CFO be involved in an incident? Because he's sapping our resources, as it turns out. Whoops. How to fix that?
I had a question for Venkat, because you do a lot of tabletop with different companies, right? Are you able to then leverage one company to the other, right? Because I think a lot of companies, if they're not doing this from the bottom up, which I think I would argue that it's very healthy, like, P1s to P3s to P1, the tabletop exercise is a really good one, right? Are you able to reuse those materials to say, well, in those companies, this happening, in that company, that happened, right? To then check it. And by the way, check out Monday's session on incident response. because the guy who did it present some really good hard data. It was called The Truth Suffering About a Cyber Attack, but James presented some really nice data about incidents and a nice skill chain. So I think you can totally build some nice tabletops. So how's your experience of cross-company collaboration and how receptive companies are when you go, well, this is really not theoretical, it just happened to those guys over there and in that world?
Perfect. So that's when we do tabletops, one of the good things is we start off with a clear objective, right? What is the clear goals and objectives? The very fact is you need to have clear goals for your tabletop, right? So this itself is shareable. Like we keep sharing across this particular company, they did just one tabletop to exercise if they can respond to this particular AWS incident in 90 minutes. Or I just want to test my communication plan. So the moment you have a set of categorization of goals and objectives, again, that is shareable. At the same time, when you conduct your drills, again, your injects. So most of the injects are shareable. Like, for example, we basically have a library of injects, which is fairly common enough. Like when something happens, you're less on resources, or something doesn't work out, your communication breaks. So if you observe overall, we start building libraries. We start building libraries of objectives, goals, at the same time, the kind of injects. To the final of it is the after action report, right, which goes out, which clearly tells what are the findings and observations. So the advantage is we get a lot of these patterns, and we just tell this at the end of the drill, these are your possible findings and observations. All they need to do is tick, telling, oh, I found this. That kind of patterns. Again, why we are doing all this pattern building, library creation is we want these tabletops to be done regularly. I mean, over a coffee, I want to do a tabletop. I should be able to do.
How do you handle the scenarios when the problems are not security related, the problems are business related? See, the more I realize that most of security problems are actually a side effect. It's almost like we are the warning sign. We are the ones that go to them and press a little bit and going, ooh, this is a problem, right? So how do you navigate where fundamentally a lot of the challenges and the reasons why XYZ is not happening, it's a business process or even a business model process, a business model problem?
Yes. So what we typically do is, see, there are a category of tabletops, right? One is very simple day-to-day alerts, right? They could be your tabletops. But at the same time, today, most of the incidents that we take, the scenarios, we try to ensure there are playbooks. We create playbooks at all levels. Yeah. There is playbooks at technical level. There are playbooks at the executive level. So a combination of the playbooks at technical level, the executive level, in fact, what we even do is before a tabletop, we do one exercise, which is again a pre-exercise called, you divide into 3 phases. One is a pre-tabletop, during tabletop, and post, right? Same for a crisis. We do a pre-crisis, during crisis, post-crisis. So it's very important during the pre-crisis or the preparation phase where clear roles, responsibilities are all well classified. In fact, what we're driving towards over a period of time today is the companies need almost structured playbooks, right? Which is clearly telling them, okay, these are my steps for response. What I'll do is, can I share my screen and show one example? Yeah, I'll just show a quick example of how a structured playbook can bring in efficiency. So what I'll do is I'll walk through one example here of a website defacement case. So in this case, right, for example, it's a website defacement. Clearly, it's divided into phases. What's my steps of preparation, detection, identification, containment, remediation. Now, someone from IT logs in, he clearly knows these are my roles. I mean, these are my tasks, for example, right? These are my tasks for containment. What are my tasks for containment? Someone who is from, say, for example, the IR team clearly knows these are my specific tasks. I can start on them, stop on them. Start, add my notes, add my artifacts, stop on them. Very clear, structured playbooks, which makes it a lot more easier. At the same time, we have a drill manager. Like, for example, in this case, the drill manager is here. Let me just show the drill manager view. Just 1 second. Let me open that view of a drill manager. Okay, this is IT. This is. Let me just start the drill manager. So the drill manager keeps injecting things. Let me start this drill. Okay, this is IRT. So each of them have their own roles and responsibilities, and they play around the playbooks.
Yeah.
What I want to indicate here is we need to provide a lot more structured playbooks sometimes. I mean, there are two types of tabletops. One is a fully structured one, but typically when we start, as you were telling, 1, 2, 3 incident, right? The first incident is ad hoc. So we start with an ad hoc incident, identify the gaps, slowly move towards semi-structured to fully structured. So around third incident and fourth incident, we want enough muscle memory to be built.
Yeah. Be interesting
So
to
that's
measure
the
that.
evolution which takes place here.
Yes, I think measure that would be right cool. All right, guys, I think we top of the hour. So just maybe around the room, any final thoughts quickly? Guy, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think we covered all the important points. I think we need to create a sense of realism, a sense of urgency, and I totally agree with Dinis' way to use any real opportunity we have, and sometimes we have to blow it up a bit to get a sense of urgency so that we get the practice, and over time make the incident more realistic. I think that's important. And then thinking about that we need engagement rules, and it's okay to call up the head of legal department to make an PO on a Saturday night because you need a review because the money is very big. That has to become normal, and he should know this can happen. So these are many rules. Like you said, who can make what decision is very, who can wake up anybody. Do we have to even simple things like that are important. So adding those realistic elements to the scenarios as they go, and also establishing the concept that we need to repeat it. We've done it once. It took a day or half a day. We'll do it again in 4 months, 6 months, but not in 2 years or 1 year. It's not enough, and so forth. Of course, it's better if you have a little bit bigger incidents occasionally in between. That keeps us all sharp and motivated. And then the desktop exercises get more audience and more enthusiasm. So you have to a little bit pray for little incident occasionally, which is
generate that because we can hack the organization, right? Nathan, any final comments from you? I know you need to go to.
I've got to run, man. It's been great. I really enjoyed speaking with you all again. I'll see you all later.
Let's do another one in June, right? This is a great
Absolutely.
topic. Let's find another topic that is related to this.
Yeah, man. Incident response again. Absolutely.
Yeah, part 2.
Later, man.
Right? Cool. Venkat, any final words from you? You good?
One quick thought is we need to do tabletop exercise regularly. I feel that should be the culture of the company. It has to be done very regularly. The facilitator has to be absolutely encouraging. All depends on the facilitator to conduct an effective tabletop.
Yeah. Cool. Brilliant. All right, guys. I got some nice comments of people sharing, but I think we're good. I'll stop recording and I'll see you on the next one.
Okay. Thank you so much for having invited me. Thank you.